Hi, this is Larry Bauer, Chief Executive Officer of the Family Medicine Education Consortium, and with me is Dr. Aaron George of Summit Health in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And the two of us have the opportunity to spend some time with Dr. Nancy Dickey, who is a family physician, also known for being the first woman to be president of the American Medical Association. Dr. Dickey, thank you so much for joining with us.
So delighted to be with you, Larry and Dr. George. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Dr. George, would you like to lead off?
Sure. Dr. Dickey, one of the things that we've been working on with this project is really to try to do our best to capture some of the voices, some of the stories, and some of the vision that the early founders of family medicine and those folks that had such an impact on the profession had in the earliest decades. And our goal really is to see these stories and these voices and these visions played out for the next generation, and so that these can be kind of preserved and also hopefully to offer a chance to reinvigorate the spirit of family medicine with a recognition back to the roots of the profession. So I think the first thing I would love to ask, and this is going to be a wide open question for you, is just as you think back on your career and how you've interacted with the profession of family medicine, what would be your sense when you think about the conversations you've had with folks about what the original dreams of the founders of the profession were when they set out?
I think that the early conversations were a recognition of the importance of having a wide but firm base on which medicine was to be foundationed. And when you realize the timing that family medicine as a specialty was evolving from the old-time GP, but evolving at a time when medicine was becoming specialized and super subspecialized. So it was a recognition that even while you were training somebody to take care of a subset of pediatrics, somebody needed to kind of take care of the cornerstones, the family unit, the chronic disease, the illness that spans across both the generations and healthcare issues. And so and at the same time, I applaud them for recognizing that becoming a specialist was important. It was important to your stature. It ultimately became important for your income. And so I think quite early on we had conversations about the fact that this was not just a retooling of training for GPs, but rather this is the specialty in breadth to counter the increasing specialties of narrowness.
So I think actually the term threat is interesting. I have to share with you in a lot of these conversations that Larry and I have had, kind of similar sentiments in terms of saying, that there was this group of people that felt that there was something different that was needed, and that maybe the communities needed something, and then that was threatened at the time. And I'd love to know, as you're kind of reflecting back upon this, do you have a sense for what change that was hoped for? So the healthcare system and the delivery of care in the United States in the late 60s, as opposed to what was dreamed could be made better by having a specialty like family medicine.
I think the dream comes back to the very thing we continue to struggle with today, and that is that being a physician is all about taking care of the patient, but the patient is often bigger than a single person, and it is certainly as big as the variety of things that a single person might suffer. So I think that it was the desire to maintain the opportunity to take care of patients across time and across organ blocks, specialty arenas, and that became increasingly imperative as we watched our colleagues narrow their areas of interest and expertise into ever smaller pieces. And so the urgency of saying, yes, but who's going to take care of the cross-generational problems? Who's going to take care of the patient as they move from home to assisted living to living with a younger generation? Who's going to take care of the problems generated in the children because the parent suddenly has a diagnosis of cancer or a fatal heart attack? So I think it was a response to something they saw being taken away from medicine and yet innately understood as being the heart and soul of medicine.
What you've just said reminds me so much. I talked to Robert Taylor and asked him a similar question, and the way he phrased it I thought was kind of neat. He said, family medicine isn't organ or disease medicine, but it's relationship medicine. And I love that. I've actually started to say that to patients. I say, this is relationship medicine. And, as you're saying, the recognition that there's something that's more cross-generational and there's something that, needs to tie together all the different loose ends that the specialists are starting to really carve out. I think that is definitely the theme that, Larry and I are finding as we're talking to folks. And I guess I would ask then, one of the other comments that we've heard from a lot of folks is that they felt like family medicine was a reaction to something. Maybe it was a counterculture. Maybe it had to do with the air or the climate in the United States following World War II and then building up into the 60s and 70s and this whole counterculture movement in the United States. As you reflect back, did you get that from folks from that generation that were coming through, that there was kind of this like countercultural feel to it? Was that something that you recognized?
I'm not sure that I was as philosophic about family medicine. And so looking back, I recognize it. Looking back, I recognize both actions and comments of my mentors and myself that were a pushback against the subspecialists. Somehow the fact that a person would train to take care of a micromillimeter in the back of someone's eye implied that was a more intelligent, competent, important physician than the doctor who took care of the entire community or took care of the breadth of one person's problems. And so the pushback, I think, was that it would have been okay for people to develop specialties if they didn't have to somehow kick the group that wanted to continue being the full breadth of a physician into the mud. Why did we have to be less in order for them to be more? So most of the pushback I saw, I think, came in response to people denigrating the value and the energy and intellect it takes to take care of the breadth of medicine, and that they truly, I'm not sure, see that value until they have a chronically ill patient they want somebody else to take care of. But so I guess, I think when I first started, and I was probably the first part of the wave of 3-year training for family medicine, and some of that was just medicine's becoming more complex. There were still places that you, in fact, I think here in Texas, you could finish medical school and do 1 year of internship and go hang a license. And by the way, you got your license after you got out of med school. So So the increased training, I think, was a recognition that, in fact, medicine is more complex. There are more medications, there are more diseases, there are more diagnostics, there are more relationships, doctor to doctor and facility to facility. But the need to create a robust philosophy came in a pushback to people who seem to be implying that the rise of specialty meant the demise of generalist medicine. And, you know, I have for many, many years threatened to start signing my name, you know, Nancy Dickey, MD, JFP, just a family physician. It really is kind of the mentality out there. What kind of doctor are you, or are you just a GP?
I'm just.
So I think that's where most of the pushback came. Go ahead.
Oh,
well, I was going to say,
Larry, this is Larry. If I could jump in, I'm kind of curious. As someone who chose a medical specialty that was new and untested back then, did you have any concerns about the viability of the specialty?
You know, interestingly, I didn't at the time that I chose it. I will tell you that there were some years in the middle there where I wondered. And I'll be honest, I still have some concerns about the viability of family physicians actually practicing medicine. There are those who have heard comments like Dr. Taylor's about relationship medicine, who are prepared to say, oh, that's great. Why don't you guys go over and be the social workers? No. We're saying that it's so inclusive that it includes relationship medicine, but I'm associated with a residency program down here that is desperately trying to continue to train young men and women to go out to very small towns. And, you know, there's only one brand of doctor that can actually go out and survive in a very small town, and that's a well-trained family physician. You can't send an obstetrician out there. They eliminate half the population. You can't send a pediatrician. They eliminate 60% of the population. You might get by with a geriatrician. I'm not sure. And yet this desire to kind of put us in a box someplace threatens our capacity to train a subsection of our specialty that in many ways is the epitome of family medicine. So I still worry about our future. I worry about whether we can convince payers in a tight economy that the foundation stone is still, that if they would use us effectively and appropriately, we would use their dollars so much more cost effectively than embracing specialty care. Now, I don't want to go without specialty care, mind you, okay? For me and mine, I want access when we need it. But the overuse of the system is largely tied to subspecialty care. But I still, after 40 years, I'm not sure we've sold ourselves to the folks that have the biggest pocketbooks and some of the folks that have the biggest policy mouths.
So I'm wondering if you could comment over the years, what are the achievements of the family medicine specialty that you're most proud of?
Some of them are little things and date me a bit, but from the very beginning, family medicine has embraced the youngsters in the profession, students and residents and even people who were simply aspiring to be medical students. It's a sign, I think, of our capacity with relationships to say that we want you to be part of the fold from the very beginning. Family medicine has shown all the other specialties who've bothered how to do that. I think family medicine has had some of their most powerful achievements maybe in the last 20 years. The whole future of family medicine and what should your family medicine office and interface look like, that has ultimately led to the concepts of medical home, the concepts of continuity. I think those are powerful, and the fact, heaven forbid, that other broad-based specialties have embraced them, the internists and the pediatricians, to a much lesser degree, but have embraced the concepts. I think it will be one of our lasting impacts. I think perhaps the other one is the almost from the start, the realization that our successes would come partly from our ability to include the patients in the conversation, the community in the conversation, about what do you need and what do you want? What is family medicine? What should it be to you? Why should you have one? We've become a little more sophisticated in that conversation, but I think it's existed almost from the beginning. And again, it's something I've seen copied by other specialties, but it's kind of been part of the core of family medicine. And then there's the things that they're so innately tied in what we do that sometimes I forget to even think about them. When I have occasionally, with a chuckle, watched the conflicts with internal medicine and continuing competence, the maintenance of certification.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have to chuckle and say to them, we continue to make ours better and stronger and polish it up, but there's just never been a question, to my knowledge, of the importance of demonstrating that you were continually keeping up with this massive thing called medicine. How foolish that you think that you passed a test when you were 32 years old and that should suffice for the next 40 years. I have to stop and make myself say, wait, that's one of our contributions. We've done it from the very get-go. And we've done it with fairly little fanfare, to be perfectly honest. We have, it has to date back to the mid-90s. We said simply coming in and passing a test isn't the whole thing. So we've had family physicians reporting on their office care, and they're reviewing their records out of their office, and saying part of certification is, do you just talk the talk, or are you walking the walk at the same time? I think we've done things for so long that many young family physicians probably don't even realize that was pretty revolutionary when we started it, and it's just become part of who we are. And I would expect us to continue, by the way, to improve and enhance our processes, even as we kind of watch, hopefully with a little bit of amusement, some of our colleagues as they struggle to figure out how to do that. Those are the ones that come to mind offhand.
One of the things that I've heard again and again now, that as we've kind of worked our way around and had a number of these interviews, are this theme, and I've heard you say it a couple of times now, which is some of the same struggles that were present at the outset of the profession are starting to be realized again, and there may have been a period in the 70s or 80s or perhaps 90s where things started to look bright, and there's kind of this rising generation in leadership, and then something may have been missing, or something, just didn't quite extend the way that was expected. So now, if you think back then, what do you think we missed on? If you could think about what the profession over the last 30 or 40 years really hasn't struck into, where would you have any thoughts on?
Oh, well, I'm not sure that we've missed so much as we have Some of these comments sound terribly bitter, and I don't think I am. It's been a magnificent career, but we've been in the right place, but we are still a relative minority in the profession, and so we have failed to win over our colleagues, or in some cases, the legislators. So I was around for the RBRVS. In fact, I was newly elected to the AMA board, and we were going to go around and try to explain to editorial boards around the country what this RBRVS was and why the AMA and Harvard had gone to the huge expense and trouble to try to create this. And the AMA very wisely said, now, a family doc can't carry that message by themselves, because for the RBRVS to work the way it was intended to work, the subspecialties will end up having to kind of give a little in order for you guys to get a little. So I got to make several trips with a general surgeon by the name of Bob McAfee. And Bob Bob was a delightful guy, but he was also eloquent about why it was the right thing to do. And, you know, it all sounded really fun when we were rolling it out for the newspapers, and the reality is it really hasn't changed much, has it? It's made much more complex, everything we try to do in terms of seeing patients, but it certainly hasn't drug us up to the median income in medicine. So that was a failure on the system's part, not our part. The 90s were a glorious time. Primary care looked like it was going to take its seat as it should for medicine, and managed care was moving along. I can remember standing at podiums and saying, you know, managed care has managed to do what nothing else has, and that is it's kind of flattened the inflation rate, and this is a good thing. Maybe that was a failure on our part. Patients were terrified, and it only took one or two true stories that then became hyperbole and rumors, and patients said, wait a minute, you know, I don't want my leg amputated by a family doctor, and I don't want my cancer treated by the local family doctor, and I might die while I'm waiting for the family doctor to give me permission to go see the cardiologist. We know those were not the intent, but we do know there were some abuses. But managed care put primary care and family medicine in particular where it rightly should be, where most of the industrialized world has it. And it was a fairly short decade for several reasons. First of all, you know, I'm sure you've both heard the terms. I'm a primary care anesthesiologist. Really? But I had a dear friend, that's what she called herself, because the money looked like it was going to flow to primary care, and they were terrified that their incomes would go down. I don't think they care if ours go up or not, as long as it doesn't come out of their pocket. So RBRVS and the managed care movement both held out hope for family medicine. I don't think family medicine did anything to screw up those two opportunities, but neither one of them really came to fruition. Now, you have to ask yourself, maybe if we'd had, you know, we had such eloquent leaders, but it was rarely the valedictorian of the medical school class going into family medicine. There were times, certainly were times, but that, you know, the valedictorian usually went into ophthalmology, orthopedics, dermatology, and nobody looked to see how many AOAs went into family medicine. It was just assumed. That's where you went if you couldn't go anyplace else. I had a person I had great respect for. I did my acting internship in medical school in pediatrics, and that was about the time of the year that we were doing site visits and interviewing for residency. And he said, so, you know, what programs are you applying to? And I said, well, I'm applying to family medicine. He said, oh, that's too bad. I would never take my family to just a family physician.
Wow.
Whoa. Hey, I will admit that was one of the tougher times to say, well, I don't care what you think. I did care what he thought. And so maybe part of us missing the boat has been that we should have been hollering louder, but I'm not sure to who. I really am not sure to whom we would raise our voices. So the opportunities there have been opportunities. I don't think they're the last of the opportunities, and maybe the troubled Affordable Care Act will give us another opportunity, and I wish I were smart enough to tell us how to take advantage of that opportunity, but you know, we'll see. Americans tend to, what is it Churchill said? Americans usually tend to do the right thing, but only after they've tried all the wrong things first.
Yeah.
Maybe Dr. George, you're young enough, you'll get to see whatever the right thing is.
I'm working my butt off for it, that's for darn sure.
And that's another thing we need. We need strong voices, voices who understand advocacy, voices who understand diplomacy. We need people to understand that this is not an issue of if family medicine gets what we and our patients need does not necessarily mean that it has to come out of anybody else's piece of the pie.
So that kind of then leads into maybe the next question, which is, you know, our hope is that, you know, Larry and I are looking at opportunities to try to reinvigorate that a bit and reinvigorate the voice of the founders with an idea of revitalizing where this young generation, and I'm happy to hopefully include myself in that, can really fight into it and lean hard on this. And so, you know, as you say, you sound a bit, you know, you sound a bit pessimistic, and I would disagree. I think you sound very realistic. I think you are cynical, maybe, but or negative, but you don't. I don't think you sound those things. I think that this is very much in line with a lot of the conversations that that I've had with a number of the other, you know, real. I would consider you a powerhouse of family medicine, and folks have kind of shared that. And so one of our goals is to say, okay, maybe we had these visions as a profession for how we could save American healthcare, provide access, change how care is delivered in communities, and save money and improve lives. Somewhere along the way, we're still struggling with some of the same questions that we had from the start. And so where, as we move forward, and we have these young voices, young leaders that are coming on, where could you imagine refocusing or kind of retitrating where family medicine is going? Are there things that you would see that the profession should be doing differently? And I know you've hinted around at that, but I'm just being more direct. Well,
clearly the 900-pound gorilla in terms of healthcare is the dollar, and so there is perhaps an opportunity, even as we speak, as things like shared risk and accountable care organizations. It would be a remarkably good time if we could get a handful of those to powerfully demonstrate what happens if you kind of turn the pyramid right side up with primary care, good strong primary care on the bottom, and subspecialties at the top. Because I think cost is, in fact, the Achilles heel of the American healthcare system, and so good, strong demonstration projects would be important. The other piece is perhaps one of the most difficult, and I'm always amazed. I guess I always thought the 20 years I was in private practice, my experience was that if I took extraordinarily good care of my patients, I didn't have to worry about patient loyalty. I lost a few. They changed insurance coverage and so forth, but my patients were pretty loyal to me, and I wanted to believe that was because I took pretty good care of them. But I was recently on a medical school visit, and it was myself, another physician, and a staff person. And the staff person from the D.C. area said, I don't know anybody that has a family doctor or a primary care doctor. I just kind of looked through and went, well, I think that's really one of the saddest things I've ever heard.
Oh, God.
Even my 2-year-old child I take to a pediatric clinic that has 7 doctors, and their preference is that we see all the doctors. And the endocrinologist and I looked at each other, and I said, you know, I want you to like my partners, okay, but I want you to see the same doctor most of the time, because sometimes if we wait for a symptom to show up, we miss the window. And if I see your child every 4 to 6 months, hopefully my training allows me to say, gee, Sue, something looks off here. Or all of us have sent patients to the specialist that says, I can't put my finger on it, but I've been taking care of Mr. Jones for 15 years, and there's something wrong. And the endocrinologist seconded that and applauded that, and I thought, here's a young, well-educated woman, and she just couldn't see the value. As long as she could get access to care in any one of a variety of urgent care clinics, and they were available when she wanted them, then she was just perfectly happy with it. And I thought, we've really blown it on our sales job. We need these people clamoring for continuity of care, for somebody who knows them. And we haven't sold that yet.
And those demographics are unfortunately getting worse with the younger generation.
They are indeed. They're a very convenience-driven generation, and they are very technology-driven. So they kind of like to walk in and they give 3 symptoms, and somebody orders 27 tests. And if they're lucky, they'll remember to, you know, sit down and listen to them for a minute before they interpret the tests and send them out the door. And you and I know the best medicine is to go in and sit and listen to the patients, and then if necessary, use a test to confirm whatever it was that we just discovered. How do we change that philosophy in time to keep from all our young family docs going out and becoming urgent care doctors?
Yeah. I think that's a tough question. I think that's something I would say I face. And just to go off script here a little bit, not that we have a script, but I started practice here in my hometown in an all RVU based model, and I was offered a job for $180,000, which is wonderful, and I'm happy, and that's more money than I need. But then they also said, or you could work urgent care for the same number of hours without notes or call for $240,000. And there's something wrong. There's something wrong with that. You know, I mean, there's something. I mean, I chose where my heart is, and I'm doing what I love, and I find joy caring for the people that I grew up with, to be honest, in my hometown. But you know, if you drop a family doc into anywhere USA and they don't have that same connection, you know, how do you turn down a $60,000 difference for less time and less work?
And why were they? I mean, it would not have been in Charlottesburg. It wouldn't have been in your hometown, or would it?
So this would have all been in my hometown. The urgent care facility is 3 blocks away from my primary care office.
So why are they willing to pay $60,000 a year more for you to staff urgent care than to run a family medicine office?
That's a good question. I think it comes back to your Achilles heel, right? Where the dollar signs go.
I can answer that question because you can generate more RVUs in the urgent care.
Yes, you're charging urgent charges and emergent charges. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Yep. The interesting thing is, in a value-based world, that will flip.
Exactly. But how do we get to there?
Well, it is happening. So it just hasn't gotten to that area of central Pennsylvania, but it is coming. It is coming.
Well, I hope so. I do hope so, because we, and maybe this is part of what we need to do, Larry. Maybe we need to listen very carefully, and that's part of what PCMH is doing. What is it, patients, that is driving you, if you will, to the urgent care center? Well, some of it's hours, okay? What hours are you available? So now Dr. George is working till 7 o'clock at night. My family medicine practice is open 4 nights a week until 7 o'clock. Even my free clinic is open on Saturday and wow. 2 evenings a week. So, but maybe we need to be listening more closely, more carefully. I'm not sure, however, that if you did focus group, we did focus groups when we talked about the future of family medicine, and I think we listened very carefully. I'm not sure patients can articulate terribly well what they want. And the one thing that I think would flip this faster than anything may not be possible, and that is, what would it take to get our colleagues who are the ologists and ists of the world to have the same respect and appreciation for what we bring to the table as we do for what they bring? Because that would be powerful. If you were in the hospital having your heart attack cared for, unfortunately, by the hospitalist, and he said, you know, who's your primary care physician? Because you'll see your cardiologist once every 3 months, but you'll see your family doc who will coordinate all this other care for you within 3 days of leaving the hospital. Well, we need somebody to not lump us in with the community health workers, the nurse practitioners, oh yeah, and those family docs, whoever they are. But I don't know how to turn that one around. We've still got. Go ahead.
I know how to do that. It's already happening in very advanced marketplaces. So
tell me where I may have to move.
Change the payment model so that it's not RVU driven, it's value based, and all of a sudden you free up the family doc, and there's no reason, in my opinion, that with telemedicine, with FaceTime even, that a family physician, if they weren't so burdened with all of the having to see volumes of patients and doing all the clicking in the EMR, if there was actual time for this and it was perceived, and it will be measured as valuable in terms of reduced cost, but the family doc can stay in charge, and so that hospitalist will be saying, you know, you have a primary care physician, let's get him on FaceTime here, and so we can do a proper handoff, and that brings the family doc right back into the middle of hospital-based care without actually having to be the attending physician of record. And I know this sounds crazy, but I know family docs who are doing it.
And it doesn't sound crazy, it just sounds like a fairy tale. So it's everything most of us have said. We just haven't figured out how to drive our cars on that highway. So perhaps one of the things in whatever pieces come out of this work is we need some Wall Street Journal, New York Times,
yes,
Ladies' Home Journal articles about standing medicine on its ear when you pay for value-based care instead of per wicket or widget. Here's what it looks like. Because I think people really want that, and the reality is if we keep upping the out-of-pocket costs, patients are going to care a lot.
Oh, yeah. But what if you decreased the cost and said to the patient, look, you can get a hold of your physician and your physician's team via email, texting. You can call them on the phone, and the doctor actually answers the phone, and all of a sudden you've got a patient who's no longer anxious about being able to reach somebody when they're in urgent need. And the doctors, by the way, because they're not trapped with the current EMR systems and the need to see lots and lots of patients in the office, about the studies that I've seen, 60% of the patients actually don't need to be seen in the office if there's somebody that you know and you have a relationship with them.
Correct.
So it shifts the whole dynamic.
I absolutely applaud it. I'll use any suasion I've got to get those stories out in front of people. And we could put them in no more than 8 or 10 PowerPoint slides we ought to be sending people out to every Lions Club and Rotary across the country.
Yeah.
Say, why isn't this happening in your community?
Right.
Huh.
So we have just about 20 minutes left before we have to finish up, and I'd like to hear a little bit about you're a pioneer, not only because you were what we're calling a first responder family physician who heard the siren call and you signed up for this new specialty because it appealed to your inner healer, but also you're a pioneer because of your role in the American Medical Association. Could you speak to how'd you get involved and how did you get into the leadership role?
Well, I'm going to be perfectly honest and at the same time a little embarrassed because I'd like to tell people that I had visions of all the wonderful things you could do if you had a leadership role, and therefore I set out to make that happen. I had some fairly interesting and warm welcome roles in the Texas Academy. It's where many of my early mentors were from, but I wasn't making any huge efforts at establishing myself as a leader. Although my father and my siblings might tell you that I've usually pushed my way to the front of the room. I don't know. But a colleague of mine, when I was an intern, now mind you, when I was an intern, I had almost everything I had ever dreamed of at that point. I was married. My first child was 6 months old, I guess, and I had an MD degree in my hand, and I was actually learning to be a family physician. I mean, what more could any young woman ask, right? But this young fellow was a year ahead of me in residency, and he came to me and he said, "Oh, will wonders never cease? The AAFP has always welcomed students and residents, but we've been working really hard with the AMA to get them to understand that they should bring us in at a younger age and put us in the fold so that we can grow up in the organization." And they've usually kind of pushed us off down the street someplace. So he said, we have finally convinced them they're going to put students and residents on their policy-making bodies, their councils. And I said, well, that's great, Gene. That's just really fabulous. And he said, well, there's a little problem. These are elected positions, and there are, I don't know, something like 8 positions. So I need 16 people, two for each ballot, so that we actually give people a choice. And I think I said to him, Gene, life is pretty good for me. I've got a child. We're married. I'm learning to be a doctor. And he said, well, it's a free trip to San Francisco. Gee, I don't know about you, Aaron, but I didn't grow up rich, and sounded pretty good. So I did what any good red-blooded American would do. I said, sure, put my name on the ballot, and I'll go. And then quietly said to my husband, don't worry about it. I'm going to go to the meeting. I intend to put no effort into this election, and so it'll be a fun trip to San Francisco, and I'll come back and we'll resume life as we know it. Except the guy whose name was running against me didn't show. I got elected. It was phenomenal. Here I was at 25, 26 years old, maybe 27, I don't know. And I was sitting around a table. It was the Council on Socioeconomics, which is health policy, healthcare financing. I would go to meetings and sit with the president of Blue Cross Blue Shield or Health Insurance of America or CMS's predecessor, and they listened to me the same way they listened to these much older gray-haired people. It was like getting a PhD in health policy, and I loved it. It was many times more interesting than whatever I was doing in the rest of the and of course, then what you're doing in healthcare, it's like having a new prism because you're looking at things very differently. I'm sure Dr. George cannot remember the day when one had to be admitted to the hospital to get a GI workup that included a barium enema and a barium swallow. But I sat on the council that recommended if they would just change the payment rules, things could be done on an outpatient basis. We could save all these unnecessary hospital beds. So when I finished my 2 years, I finished my residency, and so my term was up. One of the graybeards who had been on the council with me said, "We think you ought to run for a regular position." I laughed and said, "You know, that's so very nice of you, but I know the rules. I have to go back home and serve on the bylaws committee, and when I get gray hair, I can come back." And they said, "If we convince Texas to nominate you, will you run?"
Wow.
Sure, okay. So I ran and lost, but got appointed to an ad hoc committee on women in medicine. I don't think of myself as a pioneer, but I must admit there were 5 women in the AMA House of Delegates at that time. And they put all 5 of them, plus a few of us that were not in the House, on that committee. And the only good thing about that was it got me back to the meetings. So I did that for 18 months, actually ran for the council twice, got into some heated runoffs the second time, but never actually got elected to the council. But got nominated then. I got a phone call one night. I was doing the dishes with a toddler hanging on my skirt, and answered the phone, and the man said, "This is Bob Hunter. I want to talk to Nancy Dickey." And I said, "Well, this is Nancy Dickey." My brain's kind of going, "Who in the world is Bob Hunter?" He said, "Bob Hunter, the president of the AMA." I went, "Ooh, that's Bob Hunter." Bob kindly said, "You know, I think the future of medicine and the future of the AMA in particular is in the hands of young physicians and women physicians. And we've just had a tragic death on the Judicial Council, and I would like to nominate you in December to fill his 4.5 term." I didn't want to tell him. I had no idea what the Judicial Council was. So I said, "Sure." He said, "Now don't tell anybody. I make the nomination from the front of the House ratifies it, but we normally don't tell anybody who we're going to nominate." Well, that just proves that Spot the dog could have gotten elected, because when he said Nancy Dickey, there was this, you know, a pin could be heard dropping. It was so quiet. Who? This turned out to be the Ethics Council, and I spent the next 9 years, that 4.5-year term and a 5-year term of my own. It was, again, I feel like I got a PhD in medical ethics, and was extraordinarily challenged and honored to be involved in some of the discussions that we took on, and it was all because I wanted to make sure I got a free trip to San Francisco. And so then AMF or AAFP approached me and said, "We'd really like to be more involved. Would you consider letting us nominate you for the board?" And God bless Bob Graham. You ran me once and I lost. It means I'd lost 3 elections in the House before I ever won one, but ran the second time and won, and they were 4-year terms back then, so I guess they nominated me for, no, they were 3-year terms. 3 terms on the board, and then ran me for president-elect, and had wonderful support from the AAFP throughout those years, and hopefully represented family medicine well. But it was totally unplanned, and has impacted my life almost as much as being a physician has impacted my life.
Wow, what a tremendous story! That is, I love the fact that as a bright-eyed first-year medical student, and I really wanted to be a part. Having studied the history of medicine, I really wanted to be part of the AMA all along. But I showed up at the first week of school, and they said, "Hey, do you want to go to Orlando with the AMA?" And I said, "Yeah, sign me up."
I like it. But you at least kind of had some idea. But you know, that's okay. I don't have any problem saying to students, you know, as long as you participate in the activities, I think this should be a fun break. It should be a chance to make relationships that you will hang on to wherever you end up practicing medicine, that you'll hang on to for the rest of your life.
Nancy, I met my wife at an AMPAC luncheon.
No kidding. I love it.
While I was training at Duke, she was in her 3rd year of medical school at Johns Hopkins. She ended up serving as the government relations fellow in the D.C. office. And I sat down next to her at lunch, and I thought, there's no way a woman this beautiful could be at a health policy meeting.
What a compliment, though. And then she proceeded to nail you, right?
In so many ways, yes.
Oh, that's fabulous. We can both tell all sorts of good stories about why you should be a member of the organizations. So that's how I got there, and like I said, it was a fabulous ride. Just to put the cherry on top of that, so I left private practice and came up here to start a residency program, partly because the amount of travel I was doing was very frustrating. I had left private practice a few years before that and was working with an FQHC, but they really didn't like the travel I was doing, and so they said, we're going to have to cut your salary. And I said, I'm actually doing more deliveries and supervising care than your full-time docs are. Well, it doesn't matter. You're gone a lot. It looks bad, and So I said, you'll understand then if I go look for a job. So I came up here to start the family medicine residency 20 years ago. Well, I was taking off for my last AMA meeting. I was immediate past president. I would lose my chair at the table at that meeting. And we had some political upheaval here at the medical school. And suddenly, overnight, there was no dean. And they called and said, would you consider being the interim dean? I said, I don't know anything about academic medicine. The closest I've come is running a residency, and that's really none of the nuts and bolts of academic medicine. And they pushed a little harder, and I said, look, I'm not an academic. At best, I'm a medical politician. And they said, oh, that's what we need. So actually, I have the AMA to thank or blame for becoming the dean and then the president of the Health Science Center down here, because I could never have pointed to 20 years of solo practice and convinced them that I knew how to handle a budget or knew how to handle large groups of employees. But I pointed to those years at the AMA and said, we had a $200 million a year budget. I was the chair of the finance committee, and they bought it. So it paid off in ways that I, again, never would have anticipated.
So we have about 5 minutes or so remaining. And I guess what I'd like to ask is, so what would you like to share? If you had the ear of the young leaders now, like Dr. George and others, both academic and in practice, what are some core recommendations? If they'd listen to you and take your lead, what would you say to them?
I think I would probably say, don't hide your light under a candle. This is not a time for us to be humble, but rather to take every scrap of evidence there is and begin to beat our chests and say, we've waited 40 years for you guys to figure it out. Now we're going to tell you how it is and how it ought to be for the good of the nation. I think that message needs to be delivered in the halls of Congress, in the halls of the insurance companies, and in our communities, because clearly simply walking the walk hasn't brought us all the followers that we need. Secondly, I think I would say continue with what energy you've got to be sure that you are very present in the halls of medical schools, because until we kind of tip this whole thing on its head, we continue to struggle to bring in the brightest of minds. I think kids come to medical school with all of the emotional and intellectual qualities we need in family medicine, but there are too many people saying to them, I would never take my family to just a family physician. So we got to convince them that, in fact, there is a future. And frankly, if you can't live on $180,000 a year, there's something wrong with you anyway. They truly, when they hear you can't make a living as a family doc, they don't know that means you'll be making $200 grand a year. It's just that that's less than you would have made if you were an ologist or an ist of some kind. And then last, I'd say, you know, we need to be a family. We need to continually come together, because when you're fighting the battle all the time, there has to be a chance to come home and build up whoever it is that's gotten beaten up most recently. So it's important for us as a tribe, as a family, to support one another, encourage one another, even while we're out there trying to tip this whole thing over. You know, if we do those things, then I am convinced the right time will come. I just don't know what it'll actually take to precipitate it.
Dr. George, any final questions or comments?
Well, I'll toss this one back, and I'll say, Nancy, are there any questions or things that we didn't ask that we probably should have?
No, I'm not. It's been a fun conversation, and seeing what you do with it will be of great interest to me. I wouldn't hesitate, as most of us approach Medicare, and most of your oldsters anyway approach Medicare age, those of us that are still around. Don't be shy about asking us to do things, to you know, put us to work. Some of us have slowed down a little bit, and we have a little more time than we used to, and maybe some of us still have some connections in places that would be useful. I would say to y'all, as you bring your energy and kind of point the bow and the bow of the boat in a new direction, or a you know, mild correction of the pathway, just be sure to use all of the folks that are out there, including whoever you might say, gee, he or she has already done their part, but you know, we're all in this together.
Great. Well, I'm going to bring things to closure here and say thank you, Dr. Nancy Dickey, for this interview, and thank you, Dr. Erin George, for participating in this project. And this has been just a really enjoyable conversation. And trust me, Dr. Dickey, I'm actually about your age. I'm not exactly sure how old you are, but I'm about your age, and I will ask you to do things. I have no hesitation about it. So thank you very much.
I thank you for including me.